Today's conversation marks the beginning of a new season of the DoctorLady podcast interviews. And there was nobody else that I wanted to have for this first episode than my dear friend and colleague, Kelli Wilms. Kelli is a gifted speech therapist. She is the founder and owner of Playworks in Redlands, California. She's thoughtful, she's smart, she is honest, super fun and funny, and cares so much for her friends. And I'm so lucky that I get to be one of her friends. 5 years ago, last month, marks the anniversary of when Kelli got sick with COVID. And it was a very serious illness. It can be hard to remember how bad things were and how different they were back in 2020. Hospitals were overwhelmed, ICUs were full, families weren't allowed at the bedside, and outcomes, especially for people who required intubation, were often devastating. Kelli spent around 3 weeks in the hospital with COVID, and much of that time she was intubated in the ICU. In December of 2020, she was one of only 2 people to make it out of the COVID ICU alive. But surviving the hospital was only the beginning. What followed was long COVID, depression, grief, and years of rebuilding. Healing didn't and doesn't usually follow a straight line, but somehow Kelli has kept going. The DoctorLady podcast interviews are about people who have stories to tell, often women who saw a need and stepped into it, who showed up when something mattered, and who took action even when it wasn't easy. I'm inspired by women like this every day, and I want to share their stories because hearing what people are capable of and can do make us feel brave and make us feel capable too. Kelli, I'm so grateful that you've agreed to come and talk about this time and the years that have come after this. And it's a real honor to be able to start this season with you. And I wanted to just start with just kind of going back 5 years ago in general to what life was like at that time for you. What was going on?
When the world shut down, we thought it would be a couple of weeks, but we pivoted so that we thought we're going to stay open for now, but we're going to offer teletherapy. We had to learn how to use Zoom. I'd never used it before. How in the world do you even do therapy over Zoom? And how do you do that with kids and get them to stay on the computer, like on the other side? Not all of our families had computers. Not all of them had decent internet or consistent internet. And so we pivoted over that weekend to figure out how to change our schedule to create that distancing that we all talked about so that we didn't have more than one family like in the lobby at the same time. We moved out of our therapist office. So there were probably 4 of us at that time. 1 went remote only. 2 started doing remote and in person because they had to homeschool their kids. And then I was doing remote and in person, but I had thought I couldn't just do remote because we had kids that were so young and so new to intervention that there was no way that they would benefit. And so I thought, okay, well, I didn't know really how exactly we were going to do it. I didn't have some master plan. I just thought, okay, we're going to try to stay open and we're going to keep ourselves as safe as we can. So we didn't take any new clients for at least a year. And we talked to the ones that were going to stay in person and tried to have a really open discussion about, look, we need to keep each other safe. We need to do, this is what we're going to do on our end. We need you. If you have a sniffle, if you think there might, if you perceive there could be the potential of a sniffle, you have to cancel, and we'll do the same. And no one got sick that year. So between March and when I developed symptoms December 5th, I didn't have a cold. None of my clients were sick. My staff stayed healthy. And I felt like, we were doing the best that we could. It was a lot. And honestly, we didn't enjoy telehealth. That's not why I got in this field. was I didn't get into this field to work over a computer with a kid, and with little kids, I don't even feel it's developmentally appropriate. I really did not enjoy my life that year. I live alone. And so all of a sudden I had very little social interaction. So part of my caseload was remote. Some of the kids were in person, but all of my staff, some of whom are my friends, were in different rooms. And with their recording equipment and their computers and kind of set up, we were all set up kind of independently, like a call center or something. And that's not how we're used to doing things. I didn't enjoy it. They didn't enjoy it either. It was stressful. But we continued on in that regard, and we kept thinking, oh, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. And then for me, it got worse before it got better.
Yeah. And what you thought was just going to be a month or two starting in March, December, it's still that way.
Right.
And you'd been healthy the whole year. And then early December, you started having some symptoms.
Right.
And just seemed kind of like a cold at first, right?
It didn't, I just thought it was allergies. So I had plans over our Christmas break to go to the Bahamas. And so they had reopened because the whole island had closed.
And that's like your happy place. That's what you look forward to.
That is what I work for. I thrive on progress with the kids and families, but honestly, my happiest place is in the Bahamas. It's in the ocean, and I love this island. I've been there now about 10 times. And so I had a trip planned. I had my tickets. I had everything lined up. And then December 5th, I was home by myself on a Saturday night, and I was in the jacuzzi, and I was just doom scrolling and sitting in the jacuzzi and having a glass of wine. And then when I got out, I started coughing. And it was just a dry cough. It's like when you get that kind of tickle in your throat and that irritation, and you start having kind of that spasm. I couldn't stop coughing, but it wasn't like a deep cough and I didn't initially have any other symptoms. Everybody would talk about, oh, did you lose your taste and your smell? And I didn't. I just had a dry cough. I felt fine.
And I remember you telling me because it was like Monday or Tuesday, I think, when you had texted me.
Monday is when I got tested.
And you were saying, well, it doesn't feel as bad as when I've
had worse illnesses.
Yeah.
So Saturday night I had the dry cough. By Sunday I felt like, I started feeling sick. And I thought, okay, if I'm worse in the morning, I'll get tested. So that's when I went to your office and one of your nurses swabbed. We did a whole respiratory panel because I thought, oh, this isn't going to be COVID. Yeah. And we did a respiratory panel, and then you contacted me to let me know that it was positive for COVID. Yeah. And by then I was feeling pretty sick. Yeah. I have a picture of myself from that day, and I can see in my eyes like I was struggling.
Do you remember what it felt like when I called you and when I told you that it was COVID? Do you remember having a feeling like, oh shit, this is
exactly that. Oh shit. Because I had worked so hard to avoid it all year, because you hear about, okay, the people who are getting really sick have pre-existing conditions. I had pre-existing conditions, and so I was being followed by cardiology at that point. I was managed, but I had pre-existing conditions. And so I was very concerned, all I did during that period of time between March and December was I would get coffee in the morning and I would go to work and I would go home. And, and I would get takeout food and I would go home. We would order in lunch. It was one of the few highlights of this day of doing teletherapy. And then I would pick up food and I would go home. And so I had very little social at that time. And I felt like I was preventing exposure as much as I could. But I made it 9 months.
So you had this feeling okay, what happens next? You contacted your doctor,
right,
and you just kind of watched. What was that progression like? And do you remember kind of fading a little bit? Because there's a lot around those early days that you kind of don't remember. Is that correct?
I remember the first few days. So I was tested Monday morning. I felt terrible that day. I was exhausted and my body I started getting body aches like the flu. And I had like a really bad headache behind my eyes. So I had never had a migraine before, but looking back, I think it was a migraine. I was sensitive to light. I was nauseous. But I had really, I mean, just the entire orbital area, like just pressure behind my eyes. And I hadn't experienced that before. But the body aches and the fatigue, I just thought, oh, well, it feels like a flu. Gradually my cough started getting worse. I did do telehealth with my doctor at the time. I did telehealth with his NP or PA. And looking back, it probably wasn't the type of guidance that I needed. I was told to eat the rainbow.
The tried and true treatment for COVID.
Right. Eat the rainbow. Stay hydrated.
Yeah.
Okay. Rest, which I did a lot of. And then buy some vitamins.
And you can share as much, but you weren't in perfect health already, right? No. So, was there any discussion at that time about like, okay, so you have this chronic issue. This is what we need to watch for. This is when to seek more care.
No, I mean, I knew, okay, obesity, hypertension, which was managed, and then my history of upper respiratory infection, so, and being followed by cardiology, I knew that those pre-existing conditions definitely put me more at risk. It just didn't seem that bad.
And you were monitoring your oxygen at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had an oximeter. Mm-hmm. Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. I had an oximeter. So yeah, I was checking my oxygen and it was dropping. It was, but my normal wasn't like 98%. My normal was more like low 90s, like 94 for me was fine, when I was healthy. But then it dropped precipitously. But by that point, I was altered. So I would say Monday when I was tested, I felt sick. Tuesday, I was worse. Wednesday. And then I don't remember very much the next 3 days. I've pieced it together over time because I've looked back on texts from that time. And my understanding is what I believe was the situation is that I was hypoxic. I don't know where I was sleeping, if I was on my couch or in my bed. Thankfully, you had told me not to take the cough syrup that I'd been prescribed because it had codeine in it. And I remember you telling me that you wanted to make sure that my body would alert me. You were very pragmatic about it. I remember very diplomatic about it because you were telling me the opposite of what I had just been prescribed. By my doctor's staff.
So what I was concerned about was that, coughing and having air hunger,
Right.
is a sign to us. And if centrally we're being told by like the codeine to not cough, then you are affecting an indicator. And so that was what my concern was for you, that you wouldn't be able to tell when you were getting worse. Yeah.
So I wasn't on anything I wasn't taking anything like specific to actual COVID treatment. I remember I was on Singulair and they had prescribed the cough syrup and then, the other recommendations on like eat the rainbow and take these vitamins. I think I made it through 1 day of vitamins. And then at that point, I was no longer lucid.
Yeah.
And I was just in and out. I think I was just passed out on and off for a couple days. And so friends were leaving things on the porch. They were leaving soup and medicine balls from Starbucks. And, people were texting me and checking on me. And people were asking like, how's your oxygen? And I would say, oh, it's not good. And oh, are you going to go to the are you going to go to the hospital? No, maybe I'll go tomorrow. I'll see how I'm feeling. And I remember, and I looked back on some texts with one of my friends and it was like, well, I'm a little bit better today. Like the headache is subsiding, the cough is terrible, but at least the headache is better. The aches are a little better. And so I felt like maybe I was kind of turning a corner and starting to improve. But I think part of that is that I was already altered. because unbeknownst to me, I had COVID pneumonia. And so then my oxygen had dropped down. And so I looked back on those texts recently. And when you texted me, I had told you it was in the 60s. Well, the day prior it was with someone else, it was in the 70s. And I had said, oh, but I'm going to change the batteries because I don't think that can be right.
You were really nonchalant, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, so what's your oxygen? And I remember you saying like 60 something. And I was like, what? And you were just like, whatever, which is,
right, which is
crazy
not
town.
me.
Yeah, no.
I'm not stupid.
That was terrifying. I remember.
Yeah.
I think that was terrifying to me, that not only the number, but also that you were chill about it.
Well, and the day before you were texting me about it, when it was in the 70s, my friend that was texting me about it is a funeral director. And she had just lost a friend to COVID. And she's texting me and she's like, and she's trying to rationalize with me. Like, we have a close relationship. She can tell me, we can say anything to each other. And she was like, why won't you go? Oh, well, I just don't think it's that bad, blah, blah, blah. Are you scared about the ventilator? Oh, well, of course, blah, blah, blah. But just, she was trying to rationalize and try to figure out, why won't you go? Are you scared? Are you in denial? Like, what is it? She's like, that my friend just died. You know how serious this is. You need to go to the hospital. And she couldn't really push me much further than that because she had a COVID baby. So she had a newborn at home. She wasn't going to come get me. She'd already been putting herself at risk this entire time and through so much stress, because this is when they had freezer trucks, in the parking lots at the medical centers because there was so much overflow. And so she really was pushing me, but that was the day before you offered to take me. And I was in the 70s that day. And I don't remember that day, but looking back on those texts, I was absolutely nonchalant, but I was altered. And I remember I would just say things like, oh, well, I need to get a bag together. Or I need to take a shower first.
Oh, yeah.
Let me take a nap.
So when we texted, I was just like, you need to call 911. You're like, no. Like, we need to get an ambulance. No. So, at least you agreed to letting me take you.
I know by that point I admitted that I needed to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
But I didn't want, I don't know, I'm assuming I didn't want the drama of, the 911 call. I don't know. I was so nonchalant on all of the texts from like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I was so nonchalant in all of the texts. And meanwhile, like all of these things, like the soup and stuff, it's all piling up outside. People are bringing me different things and remedies and whatever, and it's all just piling up. And I'm not even going to the door. And I'm not initiating texting. I'm only responding when other people are initiating with me. And it's fairly intermittent and inconsistent. I think I was passed out a lot.
So thankfully we went, I went to get you, and it was a really long time between me telling you I was there and you coming to the door. And I was texting, you're like, I need a hairbrush. Like, there was like...
It was a lot. So I packed a bag, and I didn't know what was in this bag until I was out of the ICU. And like looking for something else to wear other than like this open back gown, And so I was looking, and all I had was like, there was like I brought a duffel bag that I would usually use for like toiletries and stuff when I travel. So I have this Swiss Army bag, and it has 2 dirty t-shirts, a wet brush, my Aveda paddle brush, some leave-in conditioner, because after that, my hair wasn't washed for a month, so I'm not sure what difference that made. So 2 hairbrushes, my leave-in conditioner, 2 dirty t-shirts, and then a dirty COVID-ridden soft blanket, like a throw. That's what went in my bag. I couldn't find my keys. I remember I was looking all over the house trying to find my keys. And you're like, I'll go back and find your keys. I'm like, no, I need to find my keys. I need to lock my house. My mind wasn't working at that point. And I don't remember anything at that point in terms of symptoms. I just know that it was very difficult for me to have any kind of executive function whatsoever. Like all of a sudden, like an area that I would typically, I don't have attentional problems. Like I have good judgment, good planning. I'm thought to be smart, historically. And I'm packing, 2 brushes and a couple dirty t-shirts, and it's taking me a really long
really
time.
long time. And then when I saw you, at the door, that was like, oh my gosh, like, you did not look well, or like you weren't there, and it took us a really long time to get from the door to the car.
Which is not far.
No.
But there's a few stairs.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's what, 15 feet?
Yeah.
If that. I mean, my front yard's very small. And the porch is small. So just, it was probably a matter of like what the breathing of trying, being so short of breath.
You were.
And trying to get down those 3 stairs, to walk over. I probably hadn't been walking, for a couple of days, other than to try to find these random things that I packed in my duffel.
Yeah.
Some go bag.
So, wow, that'd be kind of interesting to analyze when we talk to somebody about like
how I picked those particular items.
Items. Do you remember being admitted?
No. I remember getting in the back seat of your SUV. I remember that what the leather upholstery smelled like. You had like hazmat gear.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And you had said you were going to give me an N95, put the window down. I'm getting in the back seat and we'll go. And then I remember some of the conversation about me wanting you to contact my power of attorney, and talking about, I don't know. I mean, my mind must have known on some level how sick I was, because I didn't just think I was going to the ED. Like I knew I was going to be admitted, because we were talking about, that I don't ever want to be I don't ever want to just be on life support indefinitely without some chance of, regaining my quality of life. I like my friend who's my power of attorney knows that. Any of my close friends know that. I remember hearing of the Terry Schiavo case many, many years ago, and you hear about different things where people are where the courts, for some reason, some party wants someone kept on life support indefinitely when there's absolutely no chance of a meaningful recovery. And I never, ever wanted that. And so I think there was so much in the news at that time about ventilators basically being a death sentence. And so I don't know to what extent that impacted kind of my decision-making on avoiding going to the hospital, maybe on a subconscious level, or if it was just a matter of not realizing how sick I was. I remember at some point once I was in the ED, so I don't remember the parking lot, which is probably for the best, that I don't remember the tents or the freezer trucks. I do remember they were putting plastic cubes over, like giant plastic cubes on COVID patients so that we wouldn't shed virus, like when we were transported. I remember something about that. But I also have a picture of it. I don't know, somebody took a photo of it, because apparently you and I were texting that night, which I don't have any memory of. And there's a picture of me with that thing over my head, and I'm on oxygen, and there's a monitor with my vitals and me giving a thumbs up. Although I don't even look home, I don't look right in that picture. And so they had me on oxygen. They got me on oxygen right away, is my understanding.
Yeah, they were really quick to come and get you out of the car and to move you in. And you responded really well initially.
Yeah.
But not for long.
Right.
It was within the next 12 hours, I think.
Mm-hmm. So there's a text between us where you were checking on me and, how are you doing and how are you feeling, and I had said that I had been doing better and that they were, that I was talking about the different assessments that I'd had. So I'd had an EKG, they'd put me on steroids. I was responding well to the oxygen. I was feeling better. Some complaints about the place,
yes,
and the amenities or lack of amenities. And then the next morning, I can tell I was off in the way that I worded it to you. I seemed disconnected in the text, but I had said that they told me I was confused overnight, so they were moving me to the ICU. And I don't remember any of that. which is probably for the best because I would have been terrified.
So there wasn't that time that in that part that was as much disorienting because it's not a part of your memory of that worsening there.
No, I was told later that I agreed to the ventilator. But I mean, I apparently agreed to the financial, I signed a financial agreement. I signed something, like I signed different things.
Isn't that an interest? That would be an interesting conversation to have about like how ready you were to be able to sign.
I wasn't competent.
Yeah.
But I signed, I don't know what, I mean, I could have signed a lot of things that night. I think for a few days, I could have signed many things.
So you just mentioned a little bit about like kind of that there's that gap. But you do remember parts of the ICU delirium. So tell me a little bit about that and I don't know that everybody knows about ICU delirium.
I didn't.
Yeah. So
I had never heard of it. You were actually the one who mentioned it to me. Mm-hmm. And then I still didn't think that that's what it was. Mm-hmm. So
because I remember when I realized, because at first I thought we were messing around, we were texting. I didn't know you're altered, and so I probably contributed a bit to the.
Oh, you definitely triggered some of the biggest. You were definitely a trigger in one of the characters in the hallucinations.
My gosh,
and more than one hallucination. I mean, the escape. The celebration of life. You played a very large role.
So let me just say that at first, there was different times when I just thought, because we mess around. We just.
Oh no, I recently read the text. I know what you did.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you did. It's like talking to somebody who's sundowning and you're just like going along with it. Oh yeah. When I'm like, I gotta escape. Get me out of here.
You gotta get me out of here. And I'm like,
out of here. Oh, sure.
I'm like, okay, Rihanna, I will be right over. We'll come get you out, thinking you're messy, and then I contribute. So I remember once I realized I talked to
you were concerned.
I was concerned, and I was talking to Rihanna too about talking to the doctors about, was this a neurologic effect of COVID, which we know can happen, or was it ICU delirium? And that was kind of my first realization that you weren't you at that point.
Right.
So so talk to me a little bit about, because now you really know a lot about ICU delirium, not only from what you've read and studied, but also your experience with it.
Right.
So talk a little bit about what ICU delirium is.
It's hard to explain some of the experience. Like I 5 years later, I still can't really explain to another person the time warp that I experienced, because I was either in some kind of like vivid hallucinatory state where, I mean, it was very different than a dream. It was absolute, like full audio, visual, color of scenes happening to and around me. And some of the characters were, some of them were real, and some weren't, and many of them weren't. There were people from my past and my present life that played a role. Like another therapist that I trained years ago he was in Scrubs there. Okay, he works in a children's hospital in Los Angeles. He wasn't there. But basically, it was either kind of black with kind of in and out audio, or full on hallucinations. And so there was a lot of paranoia. So ICU delirium, I've learned, is caused by like basically ventilator dependent COVID is like the perfect setup to have ICU delirium. So my brain created this whole thing where I thought that I had been kidnapped from a continuing ed program gone wrong in Los Angeles, and then caused a massive stroke. So I thought, on some level, I had had a massive stroke and I was locked in, because at times, maybe this is when the meds weren't as strong, at times I knew that my brain had some thoughts. They were fragmented, but there were thoughts. But I knew on some level, I didn't realize I was on a ventilator, which seems so strange. I realized that I couldn't talk. I realized I couldn't move my legs. And then I believe they did let me try to write. I was writing, and like the letters, I have some of the papers at home, and the letters were huge. Sometimes they didn't make sense. It was fragments of ideas. So I would have maybe a phrase or sentence level idea in my brain. And I would get out maybe a word, but it might not even be the right word, almost like an aphasia patient, or a brain injured patient. And I would I would spell things incorrectly, which is not me. Now, sometimes there were some smart ass comments. And so I thought, okay, then I must have been turning a corner at that point. I must have been either the meds were, I was being weaned at that point, or it was a different med. But there's some things where it's like, okay, that's me when I'm looking at it. But other things just, they didn't make sense. I thought a nurse had stolen my iCloud password. I thought that her son was a drug addict who was breaking into my house. I almost called 911 from my hospital bed because I swore it was so vivid. I swore that I was watching on my Ring app some truck in my backyard, breaking into the casita. Mind you, the casita had just been remodeled. There was nothing in it. There was nothing to steal. You're not going to steal quartz countertops, There was nothing to steal. But I had this whole elaborate theme that played out, I would say, throughout my ICU experience of this iCloud issue and this paranoia around my password, having been kidnapped, and they were keeping me there against my will. And I wanted to go to a different facility. I wanted somebody to take me to Cedars, specifically you. I wanted you to bust me out of there. And so in one of my hallucinations, you and my friend who was my power of attorney, you were both in it. You were both in yellow scrubs, and you were trying to bust me out of there, but they wouldn't release me. When you guys were trying to break me out, I tried to get out of my bed. And so I wonder if that part was real. Oh, yeah. I tried to climb out of the bed, and the nurse was telling me that you have COVID. If you get out of bed, you're going to die, And me arguing, like, I don't have COVID. I've been kidnapped. They're going to take me to Cedars. She's a doctor, just this whole crazy thing. And then the person injected me with something, and I passed out, and everything went black. And so I wonder, actually, if I was agitated and trying to get out of my bed and someone did inject me. I don't know.
Do you remember being scared?
I remember constantly being paranoid. I remember feeling disrespected in my care. And I don't know that that was even true. I was so inflamed. Which test was it? My BNP, I think. I know my CRP was off the charts. My BNP was like over 5,000. I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know this actually until probably a couple years post. I was in acute heart failure. My liver was damaged. My kidneys, I had a kidney infection. I had sepsis. I found that out later. But a lot of the information I found out from you and from my friend that was power of attorney. I didn't find out a lot from medical staff. Now, I was sedated throughout the ICU experience, and I don't remember very much of my care at that time. What I do remember is just the trauma of all of these paranoid hallucinations. I had one where I was at my own celebration of life. No, you were there selling books. Chris was selling CDs and playing guitar. But it was so vivid. And I could hear people having conversations, people that weren't in my room, obviously. I could hear my mom crying and being comforted by one of my friends. And I was off to the side and I realized later what it was. I was on this green, raft thing. It was the mattress, the ICU mattress. I was propped up on a wedge on that green mattress. My legs weren't functioning. I still had a tube in my mouth, even though I didn't realize I was on a vent. And I was watching all of this. So I was in that broken place that I, in reality, was, but watching my own celebration
And
of
there's
life.
some things in one of some of your deep fears that you didn't want to have happen that were showing up in these paranoia, delirium of not wanting to be locked in and stuff. And that kept on recurring.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you remember? You also had some, before we move on, also some of the kind of psychedelic, colorful things.
That one was I don't know how long I was on that drug, but that was lovely. So the highlight of my ICU experience, I think they tried ketamine.
Okay.
And so I will never use fentanyl or propofol. I'm not a street drug user, but fentanyl and propofol are not for me. Yeah. You know, ketamine is nice, but ketamine also creates delusions too. So during the positive part of the drugs, it was what I know that I did a report when I was a little kid, like in elementary school, I did a report on LSD. I'm Gen X. I grew up during like the DARE, like just say no to drugs, kind of Reagan era, the dangers and how people would try to pass it to you and what it would do to you. This was an acid trip. Whatever they gave me was an acid trip, and I loved it. And so I created this entire like Haight-Ashbury kind of immersive art experience.
With your mind.
With my mind.
Okay.
In my room. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I need to record this. I need to document this gift that I've been given. This is amazing. Like this is phenomenal. Like this is going to be how I get out of all of this, is with this new gift that I have. Mind you, I can't even draw. My printing is horrible. I'm not crafty. Okay, I didn't become an artist, but my mind though had never failed me. So my mind took over and I could create art on the walls. So at some point, somebody gave me my phone again. I think they kept I would do crazy things on my phone, then somebody'd give it back to me, and I'm like half conscious on drugs, and I'm texting people and I'm telling people I've had a stroke. I'm telling people to get me out of here. I'm trying to get somebody to pick me up. But during this, I took a picture because I knew no one would believe this new, gift. And the picture, the picture is a shadow on a white wall above an observation window. That's the
documentation. Mm-hmm. What are kind of your first memories do you remember right after being extubated? Or did you kind of start to have some awareness after you'd already been extubated for a little bit?
So I think that they extubated me Christmas Eve. I remember being really, really thirsty and wanting, begging for water. And they gave me ice chips. And I remember devouring ice chips. But I don't know if that was Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. But I remember they wouldn't let me have water until a speech pathologist cleared me. So, which was kind of wild. Yeah. I have a few notes on a large piece of paper that I wrote. I have speech ? And I mean, the font is this big.
Yeah.
Speech. Do you know who I am? God, I hope I wasn't rude to her. And so I think on Christmas Day, she evaluated me and just did a really brief bedside swallow. And so she just tested me on worm pudding and puree and graham cracker, old graham cracker. Just tried me on a few things to make sure that I could swallow.
You can remember that testing?
Mm-hmm. It was very brief because I remember then looking back later and thinking they charged $1,004 for that and that I needed to increase my rates.
You were still, though, there's probably this time of trying to figure out what really is real and what's not real.
I was really confused because I know that morning on Christmas Day, 3 doctors were at the door at the observation window, and they were talking to me through the window. And one of them was like, "Do you remember me? I admitted you." And I said, no, I'd never seen the man before. There were 3 of them. I didn't recognize any of them. One of them said, "It's a Christmas miracle." Mm-hmm. And they said, "We really needed a win." And I didn't even understand. I still wanted to know if I'd had a stroke. Mm-hmm. So they said that I was a Christmas miracle, that only 2 of us had survived the ICU that month. And I later, in speaking with my friend who acted as POA and in speaking with you as well, I mean, there were times where because she would call and touch bases with the staff each day. And there were times where they didn't have time to talk to her because so many people had died in the past hour. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand what had happened, and it took time to piece it together. But I know I still had the effects of the drugs in my system because my brain still wasn't, I was kind of in and out where I could process some things, but then I would forget that they had told me something. It was just, I was very disoriented. I was frustrated. I was confused. And I didn't understand where I was or what had happened to me. But the way that healthcare was at that time, it's not like there was some case manager who was going to come and explain things to me. No one explained anything to me. And so the doctors came to the window. They said I was a Christmas miracle. One came in and shook my hand. And I remember him saying, he's a pulmonologist, I found out later. I wrote him a thank you note a few days ago. He shook my hand and he said that basically we throw these machines that they don't know how to treat COVID, is what he told me. And that we throw the technology, we throw these machines at the people, and then we just pray. And I still was really confused about this whole Christmas miracle, and it's Christmas, and
That really stuck in your head. Like, that's been a thing that
the Christmas miracle
Yeah.
part. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I had never even seen these men, and here they'd been treating me for weeks, and they were in the process then of transferring me to another unit. So those doctors had come to say goodbye, and that was it. And they put one of those cubes over my head again, and they transferred me to another unit in the old hospital where I think it had been like a med surge floor or something, but basically everything had become a COVID unit at that point. And they had a lot of floaters in terms of staff, also people from different departments, people from different staffing agencies, a lot of inconsistent staffing. The nurses tended, well, and the doctors too, the staff seemed to try to stay out of our rooms as much as possible because, they didn't really know at the time, how long is that virus active? They had only just started rolling out the vaccines to first responders, frontline people, like in the last couple of weeks. I wasn't yet eligible for it, but I know that nurses were telling me that nurses and therapists had told me, oh yeah, I just got my vaccine last week or whatever. And so people were still really concerned about working with COVID patients, and to come in our rooms, they would have to change PPE each time. And so they definitely limited the interaction, but with that also limited the patient education. And I feel like it limited kind of my reorientation to putting the pieces together to what had happened to me. I still wasn't very clear on what had happened to me, but I knew I was broken.
Yeah. I remember, from when I used to work in the hospital, there being whiteboards, today is this date, my nurses,
Mhm.
this. Would they review those kind of things with you? Do you
They did.
remember?
I don't remember them reviewing them, but sometimes those were accurate. Some were good about like introducing themselves, at least saying, "Hey, I'm so and so, and I'm going to be your nurse today."
Did you find that was really helpful? I mean, we think about that as just like kind of a polite thing, but that can also be like a really just bringing in some of these introductions
I think
and
it's essential.
anchors are important, right?
I think it's essential. I think it's part of feeling human because when you're in an ICU and then even within a COVID unit, because I had so many deficits after being in bed for, and restrained and on narcotics for 3 weeks and not sleeping, and my inflammation and my organ damage and all of the stress to my system, I was so sick and so injured that I also felt like I lost my agency. Like I felt like I lost some of what it is to be human because in the week before I went in, I was a business owner. I, was a high functioning adult. I was independently managing my life and my business and assisting in managing the lives of others, and I'm not just like, I could say, I was competent, but I'm more than competent in my field. I'm excellent. And so here I am, I as a therapist, as someone who knows how to bill insurance, as someone who has, I had some level of privilege. I was and I still didn't get patient education. But some of the basics around introducing yourself and making the patient feel like a human and trying to help start restoring agency, I think is really, really important. Because the nurses who stand out for me there was one who was a PA, and she was a PA or an NP, but she was a floater, and it was her first day. And she was working for the Children's Assessment Center with a forensic pediatrician. That was her usual job. And she was helping because everybody was so burnt out and they were so understaffed. And she actually, when she met with me, she introduced herself. I found out like who she was and who she works with. Well, she washed my hair for me. My hair hadn't been washed in weeks. And I had two little Snoop Dogg braids on the side that somebody must have pulled it back when I was on the ventilator. And then I had a chunk of it removed, like it must have gotten matted or something, and somebody cut it out in the back. And it was just, I felt so dirty. My face hadn't been washed, my hair hadn't been washed. And by this point, I was lucid. This was probably at least 5 or 6 days into the COVID unit. And she washed my hair for me in a clean bedpan with like the worst products imaginable, for the girl who has leave-in conditioner. Although my leave-in conditioner and my wet brush, thank you, did come into use.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
So she washed my hair for me in my bed in a bedpan and then put it in like a messy bun. And it was like, I nearly cried from like the kindness that she showed me because it was just a tiny little piece of feeling human again. There was another nurse who had me a few times. She was one of the night nurses, and she liked tea, and she made a couple of different concoctions with honey and brought them for me to taste test, and just having like warm tea in the evening, like that was regulating for me. And again, just made me feel more human because the food at that hospital is disgusting. There was very limited opportunity for therapy. There was a little bit, but they would come early and I wouldn't participate. Sometimes it was on me. One came in and taught me how to like transfer out of bed to like the bedside commode. All of that was just absolutely humiliating and just so scary to me. When I got to that unit, they kind of checked me overall for like bed sores and just kind of my current status. So they checked various things, and I remember they pulled out the catheter then. So this was on Christmas. They pulled out my catheter and they had said that I would need to use the restroom within, X number of hours. And so then later I finally had the urge to go. So I called for the nurse and, and I wanted to get up. There was a restroom in the room. And I asked them to put the rails down so I could use the restroom, and they wouldn't let me go to the restroom. They offered me a bedpan. I remember just being appalled by like, why would I am not peeing in a bedpan. Like, I remember saying, I'm grown. Like, I'm a grown ass woman. I'm not going to just piss myself in this bed. I've been through enough. And they said, well, you're a fall risk. And I'm like, I'm just annoyed, And so they brought in PT to clear me. So they brought 2 PTs and they brought a walker. And I'm like so dismissive and just thinking this is ridiculous. I'm fine. Let me get out of this bed. Because upper body wise, I felt fine. I could adjust myself in bed, use my arms, push myself around, whatever. But I hadn't tried to bear weight. And so they brought in.
In 3 weeks, 2 weeks?
This was 3 weeks later.
So that you'd had this time you hadn't walked, and you were expecting though, because you're an adult,
right,
that you'd be able to get up and walk.
I went in walking.
So they have the physical therapist come.
Right.
And what happened?
And so they have me square off, like, on the bed, and they want me to use my upper body and like, get myself set up to like hold on to the walker. And I have a PT on each side spotting me. And I stood up and I'm irritated that I even have to do this. Like, just let me use the restroom. This is, and let me walk around. I need to get the hell out of this bed. I've been in bed for weeks. Like, let me out of here. I use all of my force. I use all of my upper body strength to stand and hold on to this walker. And maybe I stood half a second and the room absolutely spun. So I had vertigo, and I'd never had vertigo before. Complete vertigo where the whole world spun. They helped me get back into my bed, and then I started dry heaving. A wave of nausea and then the vomiting. And that happened a lot while I was in the hospital, but it continued after I was discharged.
Did you realize how much leg function did you have? Were you able
I
to
couldn't
support?
bear
Yeah.
weight. I mean, at that point, I couldn't bear weight. And so then I'm like, "Oh, shit. Like, what am I gonna do?" You know? And so I started doing, like, leg lifts and things in the bed, and then I would go to the edge of my bed and put my feet down to the floor and hold onto the walker and try to stand for, like, 1 second, and then built up from there. And then I built up to where I didn't have to have the walker to transfer from the bed, to the bedside commode, but I mean, it was right there. It was 2 feet from my bed.
Did you have any, like, days or thoughts of, like, "I can't do this. This is too hard."
I was willing to be compliant and cooperative and, like, do what I needed to do to get out of there. I wanted out.
Did they talk to you about what were the goals? What were the goals to get out of here? Like, you had to check off these certain things in order to get
They
out?
they said initially they had to get me medically stable.
Uh-huh.
Well, check,
Mhm.
and then they said basically they were waiting on equipment. So they wanted to order all kinds of equipment, and I turned some of it down. They recommended that I go to their rehab. They have an inpatient rehab that you can go to for like 1 or 2 weeks, but I still tested positive for COVID. And so with a positive COVID test, I wasn't eligible for admission to the rehab. So they said I could either do home health or I could go to a nursing home. Oh, I said, absolutely not. I'm not going to a nursing home. And so then that's why I think my stay was extended by a few days, is because they were trying to get equipment and get home health set up for me at home. But I remember each day it was like, "Oh, yeah, I think we're gonna be able to get you out, tomorrow. I think we're gonna be able to do this." And it probably was extended, I would say, about 4 days. And I remember getting to the point of crying. Like, the doctor wouldn't usually come in to do rounds, he would call me. And I remember him saying, "Yeah, we can reevaluate this tomorrow. We're still waiting on whatever." And, um, just I remember just breaking down where I was just done, like, I wanna go home. I wanna be able to sleep. I do not live with roommates.
Yeah.
I gotta go. And I remember kind of hitting a wall and just, "Get me out of here. Just I've gotta go. I've gotta get out of here." And so there was no way I was gonna go to a nursing home.
Yeah. Were you still
Um,
having any paranoia at that time?
no,
Did you have any kind of, like, cognitive rehab or anything that you
no,
know of at all? Just kind of
never.
working through the delirium at all?
No, I mean, I did go to a psychologist because I was concerned about PTSD. But see, I didn't know what I knew I had hallucinations. I did know that. But I didn't know that that's what ICU delirium is or what causes it or that it's actually very expected, especially in the situation I was in. It's predictable. It's a predictable, outcome. And it also can be managed, but it was more difficult to manage in that time period. Because, I mean, the types of things that they do to manage it are like early mobility, getting PT going and involving family and avoiding isolation, and considering the choice of meds, and not overly sedating. But they overly sedate you so that you don't experience the trauma of the intubation. But for me, the trauma of the trauma of the ICU delirium, of the paranoid hallucinations for 11 or 12 days, that was more traumatic to me than COVID in terms of my ICU experience. I think later realizing what it was, like kind of putting a name to it, kind of like for me, like having a definition of it, knowing what causes it and what can be done to manage it and what wasn't being done, and I don't know everything that was being done at the time, but I do know that it would have been very difficult to implement the strategies that are typically used in ICUs to manage and prevent ICU delirium. I know that there's research where they've actually cut the levels from like, at the time, like during COVID, I guess for ventilator patients, it was like 80% occurrence. And that there's been work at Vanderbilt and at other universities where they're able to reduce this to like 40%, with a certain management approach. But it would have been very difficult to even implement that. So I don't know to what extent that was implemented for me. It would have been very challenging in that environment.
Mhm. But you felt like you were able to piece it together because of the records of the
It took
texting with
time.
friends. Took some
It
time.
took
Yeah.
time because I was still too overwhelmed to review everything, and my memory wasn't holding. And so someone could tell me something, and then I would still be, but wait, what about, and I would still be kind of confused. I mean, I started piecing it together. Certainly by the time I was ready to go home, I was lucid enough to make a decision that I would still make and stand by today. I'm not going to a nursing home. I thought I have a good PPO. I will, I am a therapist. And even though I'm not an adult therapist, when we work within a field, people know people and, good people. I learned a long time ago, good people know good people in terms of whatever discipline. And so I thought I will manage my own healthcare. So I accepted the home healthcare, but I never had what ended up happening. There was kind of a failure in case management where someone dropped the ball. And I knew that there were supply chain issues. I knew that there were shortages. I ended up ordering a walker from my bedside online. So I'm still in the hospital and I ordered my own walker because they had said with my insurance, they could either get me a wheelchair or a walker. Well, I didn't want to be stuck in a wheelchair, but I thought it would be valuable to get home. It would be valuable until I built up my strength. And so they were supposed to get me a wheelchair, and that was one of the things that was delaying my discharge. And then they were supposed to line up home health. And so I'd had like home health people are calling, and I'm talking to case management at the medical center, and it's delay after delay after delay. And so the day that I'm discharged, I was just dropped in a wheelchair on the curb. And there really wasn't a plan.
So you're by yourself?
I
Was
had
re
somebody picking
Yeah.
me up.
Uh-huh.
So I had one of my staff picking me up, but the equipment was supposed to be at my house. There was supposed because I had just ordered the walker like maybe the day before, so it wasn't going to be there. But I thought I'll have that wheelchair. We've been waiting days for this stupid wheelchair that I don't want to use. We've been waiting for this wheelchair. It'll be there when I get home, and that's how I'll transfer.
Yeah. And it
I
wasn't
was
there.
getting picked up in my own SUV by one of my staff at the time, and I thought, well, then I'll transfer. I mean, it slowly, but I could do it at that point. I'll transfer to the wheelchair, and then they can get me back to the casita behind my house, where friends had set me up back there because it was more open. And the shower is curbless and like a walk-in shower with a built-in seat. And so it was going to be safer for me. But it's at the back of my property. And so I had to get from my driveway to that. And so there was no equipment at the house. And so my staff arranged for two strong guys who had COVID antibodies, who'd recently had it and recovered, to help me get home. And so we met them in the driveway, and then we set up my patio chairs like every 6 feet and created this gauntlet where I would rest and catch my breath because I had terrible shortness of breath with exertion. And so my lower body was my lower extremities were super weak. And so I would just kind of limp and shuffle from one chair to the next. And then I'd rest and catch my breath, and then I would do it again. And so we just set up multiple chairs between the driveway and the casita, like every 6 feet. And it took me about a half hour. I mean, now it would probably take me 20 seconds, and it took a good half hour. And so I had one guy holding my hand and the other one spotting me to do that. And then they both kind of just manhandled me. There's maybe 3 stairs, but they're a little bit high. And they kind of just manhandled me up the stairs into the casita. And then I passed out.
At what point did you realize how you were being called a Christmas miracle? Like how big of a deal this was that you had survived this?
I think that came in phases because I feel like it definitely registered to some extent when they said it. But the thing is, it didn't feel like a miracle. I mean, I was grateful to have lived. I was relieved, but that system was set up for survival. And for me, the hard part, then I was sedated for the survival. I mean, I had ICU delirium, certainly, and the trauma from that, but I was sedated for that part. And everybody else was doing everything. And so then the system was not set up for recovery. So the equipment that was ordered, they tried to deliver 2 full weeks later. Well, I am a very stubborn person. I could say tenacious or determined, but I didn't want to use that. I didn't want to use that wheelchair anyway. And so I just kept working at it and trying to build in tiny steps to build my lower body strength so that I could stand, so that I could walk, so I could safely transfer. But I would carry my phone in my pocket in case I fell, because there were concerns that obviously my friends were concerned that I'm home by myself. What if I fell? And I was concerned too. I worried every day about falling. And so I carried my phone on me so that I could call if something happened.
So here everybody's talking about a miracle and
Yeah,
and it's so huge that you're now home, but it's kind of looked at as like this great finish line, but that was really your start line.
correct.
That was when the work was beginning.
That was the beginning of recovery and of suffering.
Yeah.
I didn't suffer in the hospital, but I suffered for the next 3 years.